Thank you, Bernard, and Isabelle for having me in this wonderful conference. It's impressive, I must say, to speak in front of such a plentiful audience with people with diverse backgrounds. I see students, I see colleagues from different places. I think it reflects the importance, the topicality of the things you are discussing today in our contemporary world. So congratulations to all for this wonderful conference, Bernard, Isabelle, for putting all of these people together. In this second panel, we are turning our attention to another topic: industry, slavery, and European migration. I'm going to chair the panel. My name is Pierre Eichenberger. I'm from the University of Lausanne. We will have 3 presentations. We will start with Hans Fässler, which is an independent researcher from St. Gallen. It was asked that we limit ourselves to just a few words on each presenter. Here, I must say that Hans Fässler is really a pioneer of the colonial history of Switzerland, so looking forward to hearing you. Then we will turn to André Nicacio, an independent researcher from São Paulo. Welcome to Lausanne. And then we will have Fabio Rossinelli, which is here, which is a researcher from the University of Lausanne. So Hans, you have the floor. We are going to stick to the 15 minutes. So when you see this, it means you have 1 more minute to conclude. Thank you.
Friends, fellow historians, fellow activists, colleagues, guests, students, and comrades. Judging from last night's opening talk, I would guess that the number would be around 80% of comrades. What was Switzerland's share in the transatlantic slavery system, or rather the role of Swiss entrepreneurs, patrician families, merchant bankers, administrators, officers, researchers, explorers, etc.? Federal Councillor Elisabeth Bohm-Schneider, our Minister of Justice and Police, said at the opening of the Great Colonial Exhibition at the National Museum in Zurich that Switzerland had been involved, I quote, a little bit everywhere. And according to the Federal Councillor, a little bit everywhere added to, I quote, quite a lot. I myself estimate the Swiss share at 2 to 3% of the total transatlantic slavery system, which is per capita an even more substantial entanglement than that of France. However, Switzerland was not a colonial power. Swiss involvement in slavery was fragmented and not very conspicuous. The Swiss were piggybackers on the great colonial powers, and so there was no national colonial policy, no Swiss slave code, no visibly affluent plantocracy to campaign against. It is therefore not surprising that Switzerland did not produce a Frantz Fanon or a Francisco José de Jaca. We cannot look back with pride on a Maximilien de Robespierre or a Harriet Tubman. We did not have a Léger Félicité Sonthonax, nor a William Wilberforce, nor Louis Gama. But we had Wilhelm, Joos from Schaffhausen. That his intervention of 1863-64 came shamefully late in global history is due to the fact that in Switzerland, important steps of progress always take a long time. Mind you, female suffrage was enforced in certain parts of this country as late as 1990. But as regards being late, I believe that with Brazilian slavery abolished in 1888, we are in good company here. So here is the story of a man who was born into a well-off bourgeois family in the provincial town of Schaffhausen in 1821. In the 1830s, a volume of Alexander von Humboldt's travelogues appeared in the family home and awakened the primary student's sense of adventure. Wilhelm Joos studied medicine in various European cities and began to concern himself with religious questions. Tensions were already building up in Switzerland between the liberal Protestant urban areas and the conservative Catholic rural regions, tensions that would eventually lead to the Swiss Civil War, and perhaps we should put inverted commas if you look at other civil wars, the Swiss Civil War of 1847. In 1848, Joos traveled to France and gained experience as a hospital doctor in revolutionary Paris. In 1849, his father enabled him to take his first trip to South America. During 3 years as a doctor in Bahia and Pernambuco, he got to know various aspects of the Empire of Brazil at close quarters. The situation of the indigenous population, the role of the clergy, the fate of the Swiss sharecroppers, and slavery. Later, in 1859, he would write that as a doctor in Brazil, he had, I quote, stood at the deathbed of many a slave owner. He wrote of the, quote, cold-blooded cruelty of legally recognized slavery and of slavery as the curse of dishonored humanity, which is the title of my talk. It must have been during those years in Brazil that he realized that in that country there were Swiss slaveholders too. In fact, there is a long history of Swiss entanglement with slavery in Brazil, from the founding of Nova Friburgo in 1819 to the abolition of slavery, when there was still a plantation in Swiss hands, Coffee Plantation Victoria. We have heard a lot about this plantation. A quick and incomplete panorama of Swiss slave ownership in Brazil. Karl Eduard von Roth ran a coffee plantation in Rio Negro, Brazil, together with his uncle Albert Rudolf von Graffenried, both from Bern. Auguste Frédéric Demeurant from Neuchâtel owned slaves for his rape snuff factories. Heinrich Dannecker from Zurich was a slaveholder in Petropolis, Rio de Janeiro, and Dannecker's neighbors were plantation owners Konstantin Fischer and Jean Albert Fischer from Chur in the canton of Graubünden, Grison. Lucas Jetzler from Schaffhausen was a slave owner in Cachoeira. Johann Martin Flach, also from Schaffhausen, was the founder of one of the largest Brazilian coffee plantations of the 19th century, Helvetia in Leopoldina, Bahia. We will hear more about that plantation. Must be added to these prominent Swiss slave owners the so far mostly nameless settlers. Many of those immigrants became slaveholders themselves in the end, although part of the racist strategy of the Brazilian elite had been to replace slaves by European immigrants and to, quote, whiten up the Brazilian population. Let us now return to the town of Schaffhausen, which incidentally has a long colonial history, from plantation and slave ownership in the Dutch colonies Berbice and Suriname, via mercenary services for colonial powers like France, Holland, and Britain, to skulls from Namibia ending up in a Schaffhausen museum. And let us return to Wilhelm Joos. In 1857, he went into politics and ran, unsuccessfully first, for the National Council, the People's Chamber of the Swiss Parliament. On the 7th of December 1863, Joos was elected to the National Council. 2 weeks after his election, while a bloody war was raging in the US over the slavery question, he submitted a private member's bill to the government. In German, it's eine Motion. I never know exactly how to translate that into English. the government, which was then entirely in the hands of the Liberal Party, FDP. The bill aimed at the gradual abolition of slavery, so he was moderate, gradual, at the introduction of punitive measures for Swiss citizens buying and selling slaves in Brazil, at banning slaveholders from becoming consuls, and at children born to enslaved women owned by Swiss slaveholders being free at birth. Notice this was 8 years before the Lei do Ventre Livre. Joos has been criticized for being too modest in his propositions, for caring too much about the Swiss parceiros, for contradicting himself in the second bill, which he introduced in July 1864, and for playing his cards badly. There is an element of truth in this. But credit must be given to him for having confronted the Swiss political system and the public, who both frankly didn't care a straw, with the slavery question. And credit must be given to him for bringing out the worst in the Swiss government. The government mandated 3 men with a report on the slavery question in Brazil, thus allowing 3 foxes to guard the hen house. Johann Jakob von Tschudi had traveled widely in South America as an explorer and a collector. He was a racist with a great deal of contempt for the indigenous people and unlawfully appropriated, most people would say stole, an ekeko figure from 2 indigenous men, which was returned by Switzerland to the Aymara people from Bolivia as late as 2014. But the Swiss, as you know, are sometimes rather late. Heinrich David Burckhardt was a consul general, and Vice Consul Friedrich Huber was a kind of mouthpiece of the Swiss plantation and slave owners. Moreover, Swiss consular officials were known to keep house slaves themselves. And what did the report say that the Swiss government submitted to Parliament and to the world, based on the expertise of these 3 men or foxes? That the slave trade was an act that does not involve a crime. That slave ownership by Swiss craftsmen in Brazil was, quote, beneficial and expedient. That Swiss slave ownership by merchants in Brazil was an advantage. That merchants could not reasonably be expected to do without slaves because they would have, quote, to put themselves in the kitchen and do the rest of the servants' work. That slave ownership by Swiss fazendeiros was natural in Brazil, that without slaves their land could not be cultivated. The Swiss Bundesrat, the government, thus became the last Western government who justified, banalized, and excused slavery. The Bundesrat went even further, producing an ideological somersault of the most shocking kind. To deprive these Swiss of their rightfully acquired assets, i.e. the slaves, through penal provisions was, according to the Swiss government, contrary to the Federal Council's concept of morality and justice. It was, quote, an act of violence. We Swiss should let that sink in until it hurts. In 1864, according to the highest institution of the land, it was not slavery that constituted a crime and an act of violence. It was not slavery that was contrary to morality and justice. It was rather taking the slaves away from the poor Swiss slave owners. When the Swiss government of 2018 was asked by a socialist MP what they thought of that 1864 position, they shrugged their shoulders, saying that the defense of slavery by their predecessors had simply been, quote, shaped by the norms that prevailed in the 1860s. Epilogue in the form of an anecdote. At the Swiss National Marksmen's Festival in Schaffhausen in 1865, for the Swiss in here, that's ein Schützenfest, the winner of the infantry target sharpshooting competition, one Johann Kamm from Vilsbach in the canton of Glarus, received a prize of 2 sacks of pure coffee worth 250 Swiss francs. That coffee came from Jean Flach from Schaffhausen, plantation owner in Leopoldina colony, Bahia province, Brazil. And I want to finish with a few pictures. Wilhelm Joos is second from the left. His brother Emil, who accompanied him on his second stay in South America to Ecuador, Peru, and Colombia, is first from the right. The village of Schaffhausen and the Rhine at the time of Joos's parliamentary intervention in the 1860s. Switzerland within Europe, and then Switzerland with Schaffhausen in the very north, close to the German border. I hope you will find it. An archival document of a plantation called Slingeland, owned by Tobias Ott from Schaffhausen in the Dutch colony of Belbis. You will find the name Tobias Ott, and you will also find the word plantage. I don't speak Dutch, so I can't read the text to you, but some people in here do speak Dutch. Plantation 61, Slingeland in Belbis. And there are a lot of other plantations on this map with Swiss backgrounds: Essendam, Altenklingen, St. Elizabeth, Rosenberg, Montrepos, Züblislust, Hubersburg. So that's Swiss history, Schaffhausen history, colonial history, Dutch history, global history. The 3 Dutch Guyana colonies, Belbis, Demerara, and Essequibo, on the Caribbean coast of South America. Collecting animals is never harmless. It is always part of a European colonial conquest and subjugation of nature. I don't know how many of you have seen the exhibition in Neuchâtel, Naming Natures. And the animals mentioned here were all collected by travelers and people from Schaffhausen. Coffee plantation, Leopoldina coffee plantation, Johann Jakob von Tschudi as a young traveler and researcher, Tschudi on his trip through Peru, Tschudi as a hunter and a visibly superior European, Jakob Dubs, one of the members of that government that said slavery is no problem. Today's Swiss all-party coalition government of 2018, who said what their predecessor government said was okay and was the norm of the day. Sascha Huber, you can only see her hands here, suggested a memorial plaque in Schaffhausen for Wilhelm Joos and his role in the slavery debate. The plaque should be, could be, will be one day put on the house where he lived and worked in Vorstadt 40 in Schaffhausen. If you have any questions that you cannot ask today, you will find my mail address. Send me your question by mail, and I will gladly try to answer it. Thank you very much.
Good morning, my fellows. It's a great honor to be here, to be in Switzerland. It's beautiful. I'm very happy to be here. And it's great to have all this audience interested in this subject of Brazil-Swiss relations based on slavery. This is the topic of my researchers from 5 or 6 years, the Swiss-Brazil relations, the Swiss participation on slavery. But I noted from these years of research, this was part of my life since I was a child, because I studied in the Porchat primary school. If you know there, I'm talking about the Porchat factory, slavery-based industries in Brazil of a family from Switzerland with this name. When I entered the university was founded by Reinaldo Porchat. When I went to the beach with my family, we went just in front of Porchat Island, just close to, sorry, the Porchat Island, just close to São Paulo. In Santos. This story happens in Santos. Santos is the part of the region of São Paulo. It's the part for export since the 19th century. And we have a lot of this presence there. I think it's important to mention this in the beginning because it's a topic for discussion too. We historians don't discuss too much these relations, but they are part of our lives in Switzerland, as Professor showed, and in Brazil too. Other example, we have 2 neighborhoods with the name Lausanne in São Paulo, and it's because it was a land owned by a Swiss man from Lausanne. This story happened all the time. I'm noting this all the time. So I'm talking about here a specific case. In my research, I firstly mapped the Swiss businessmen in Brazil with slave-based business, and then I choose 2 cases to analyze in a more deeply way. So Porchat is one of these cases. It is relevant because it's a case of industry using slave labor when we don't have studies on this subject in Brazil. We don't have knowledge that it existed in Brazil. Usually we relate slavery to the commodities production, the rural history, not to urban history, not to industry. I will start by selling my fish, where, as we say in Brazil, vender o meu peixe. My fish is this. My research contributes to analyze a very successful case of Swiss slave-based business, resulting in the absolute integration to the local elites. Remember the Porchat Island. It is the vacation home of this family. Second point, to establish the unexplored connections between slavery and modernization, urbanization, and industrialization in São Paulo. It's relevant in Brazil because we have a very traditional narrative. It's, as I have always learned the history of São Paulo in this way. We have a past connected to slavery until 19th century, and the modernization has nothing to do with this. Modernization is something we have to thank the European immigrants for their intelligence of bringing the machines, of knowing how to industrialize a society. And when I found these sources on slave-based industry of property of a Swiss man, it goes totally on the other direction. In the third point, to comprehend the strategies of slave-based elites in the moment of the abolition, not just to keep profitable business without the slaves, but also to erase slavery from the family past. There are a lot of academic works defining the Porchat as an abolitionist. He is mentioned in works on the history of Santos, on the history of the local society, the local elites, usually as a political leader connected to the Republican movement and the abolitionist movement. Well, we will see what happens when you go to the sources. I think you can imagine it. Presenting firstly the Syrian part of Santos. Both are very old by the time. They were founded in the 16th century by the Portuguese colonization, but it was not a relevant port, not a so relevant city until the second half of 19th century, especially after the construction of railways connecting the region of coffee production in the interior of São Paulo, in the western São Paulo, to the international markets. So these railways connected the farms in the western of the province, and fastly this port was transformed in a very relevant exporting port. In that period, one of the most important leaders of the merchants in Santos was other Swissman, Rodolfo Fursten. The other case I'm studying, I will not talk much about him, but he's very important to the organization of the coffee export interests in Santos. In that moment, Santos was becoming the most important port for exports in Brazil. So that's something there's something relevant for Brazilian history. And the other case, Henri Porchat, probably from Lausanne. I'm researching here, just here, close to here in the archives. I think I found yesterday his origins in Switzerland, and he's from Lausanne. A brief chronology, I will not read everything, but just to have some information about what fabrics I'm talking about, what kind of industry. Henri Porchat started in, the first mention in the Brazilian sources is from 1839. He asked for tax exemption for opening a fabric in a leather factory in Santos. This leather factory was the most important business of this family until the end of 19th century, until the abolition. I'm sure by the time of the abolition, this was still the most important business of this family. But he also involved in a lot of other initiatives, most of them involving steam machinery, steam-based machinery, and some immigration projects, some colonization projects, as the Brazilian state called it by that time, to bring European immigration to Brazil as a way to get workers in a society that is passing through the process of abolition. But these projects are connected to slavery. The most important projects of immigration in São Paulo are organized by a man who trafficked, a very relevant trafficking of slaves too. mentioning some of these business steamships for local trade in Santos, the extraction of stones, a steam-powered sawmill, a steam-powered lime factory. So in 1866, when slavery was abolished in the United States, he helped to bring the Confederate immigrants who migrated to Brazil to keep being slave owners in Brazil, planting cotton as they planted in the United States just before, because Brazil was the only place you could do this by that time. So this business kept growing. From the 1866, from 1868, you have his investments in railways, several investments in several railways in Brazil, and his sons starts their own careers in the state. They really impress the elite, the intellectual elite, the political elite, the social elite of Brazil. They are a very successful case of integration of in one generation transforming in a part of Brazilian elite. The Vitorino Porchat was the manager of the factory, and he will be the founder of the Republican Party in the city. The Republican Party will take the power in 1889, and from then they will be in the most important places, in the most important posts in this Republican state. Henrique Porchat de Assis, other his sons, become a judge, and his daughter, Maria Carlota Porchat de Assis, founds a coffee processing company in Santos. So a business straightly connected to this expansion of coffee slave-based expansion in Western São Paulo. This story don't end here. We will see in the next slides. In 1882, it includes a soap and a candle factory and an ice factory. Well, as I mentioned in the historiography, the Porchat family is abolitionist. Well, I found 48 individuals in the cemetery of Santos that were enslaved by Henri Porchat or his sons. Most of them by Henri Porchat. There are these registers in the cemetery, and there are a lot of other evidence, like announcements in the press, because these enslaved people use it to escape from him. At least 8 people, I think it was 8, escaped, and he announces in the press for the capture of this man and woman. Well, I have a lot of information. I have worked in a database of this enslaved people by the Porchat family, and the information is basically that 39 men, 90 women, 18 of them were Africans, some of them clandestine, part of clandestine slave trade after 1831, 22 Brazilian, 8 unknown. And it's very interesting that we have evidence of African cultural practices in the fabrics, named batuques. The Brazilians know what I'm talking about. It's African drumming. It's African drumming parties that happens every Saturday in the space of the fabrics. It's an image totally different from what we think about the formation of working class in Brazil in the industries. It's other reference of culture inside a factory in the 19th century. Here are some of these documents. Here is an attempt of murder of Henri Porchat, allegedly perpetrated by an enslaved man in 1855. Okay. Someone tried, but couldn't do this. Here, advertisement for the capture of escaped slaves. Here, the discussion about the batuques. We know about these parties in the factory because a neighbor was very angry with Porchat because of the noise of these parties, and he complained in letters in the newspaper about these parties. Here we have another escape, but escape organized by a very structured group of abolitionists in the last years of slavery. This period of the 1880s was very conflictive in São Paulo, and Santos was the capital of the abolitionism in that moment because the enslaved people from the interior could escape to the coast and they be embarked to other regions. There was relevant quilombos there, places where these enslaved people could escape. This was an armed action inside the São Paulo train station. In the last years, almost in the end of slavery in Brazil. Now, finishing that chronology, I think it's interesting to take attention in some points. The most recent slave sale contracts found in Santos for everyone, all the contracts of selling slaves in Santos, the most recent is of Porchat. He was the last buyer of enslaved people in Santos. And he was, in the moment of the of freeing the eldest in the law of the sexagenarios in 1885, he was the slave owner with the who has more slaves in the city. When the most recent reference to slave ownership by Porchat family is from 1886, 2 years before abolition. And when abolition happens, starts the construction of a totally false history of abolitionist trajectory for Henri Porchat. This is a part of the story I want is relevant to understand how they could be, this way, how they could do this. Henri Porchat names street in Santos since 1890, and in 1895, when Prudente de Moraes was elected president in Brazil, in the Republic, the Porchat family became even more influential in Brazilian society. So I finish with the image of the Porchat Island in the beginning of the 20th century. In the 1930s, it became a casino Ilha Porchat. Now it is a club. It's a club with some buildings, some residence and hotel. There is the founder of the university where I studied, where we have professors here, the University of São Paulo. The square when you enter the university names Reinaldo Porchat. Reinaldo Porchat was the grandson of the Porchat I'm talking about here. They became here. They became political elite, an intellectual elite, a social elite, not connected to slavery, not connected to business. They are connected to the state, to the intellectuality, other kind of elite. I think these are the points more relevant. We can discuss this later. Thank you.
Thank you, dear friends and colleagues, for being here, and thank you to Isabelle and Bernard for organizing this conference, and bien sûr for my invitation. Today, I will not present research result, but a research program. This program is a project that will begin in September 2026, and it will focus on the role of the Swiss state in imperial and colonial world during the 19th century. So, for my presentation today, let me first present the common thread of the project, and then I will focus on the role that Brazil will play in it. My project is funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation as part of what they call Ambizione grants. So my Ambizione grant and the project is entitled Switzerland and Imperialism, the Role of the State, 1848-1918. It will include a research team of 3 persons, including a PhD student, and for partners, but also for archives. We have several countries to visit, including Brazil. And at the beginning, concerning Brazil, Professor Machado kindly gave her support to this project, so thank you again. And for me, today is also an opportunity to make new connection with you and receive feedbacks and suggestions in view of the concrete start of the project the next year. And finally, a web page already exists, but for now there is almost nothing on it. We have to wait September 2026 for updates. Now, what is the interest in starting this new project about Switzerland and imperialism? One could say that Switzerland today has a historiography on imperialism that began in 1932 and has intensified in recent years. In fact, several studies exist on various subjects like slavery, mission, business, colonial science, etc. But the gap in this historiography, beyond the fact that it remains marginal, is that no one has directly addressed the role of the state and, more generally, the role of public actors. Why? Because Switzerland didn't have a formal colonial empire, and so, apparently, the state was not involved in Swiss expansion. And my project aims to show that even without formal colonies, state activities accompanied Swiss expansion in the 19th century. So, to answer the question of what role the Swiss state played in 19th century imperialism, I have developed a research plan with 2 main topics. Topic 1, on the left, is how the state managed Swiss presence overseas, a presence of migrant and economic interest. And to address this first topic, we have to know that the functioning of the state in Switzerland was largely based on a public-private partnership. For example, with delegation of public tasks to private actors who received subsidies in return. And this functioning was also applied abroad. This first main topic will examine how the Swiss state supported Swiss expansion with consuls who were private citizens with subsidies and with other public-private partnership. Now, on the right, topic 2 refers to international relations. And this is where the Swiss state played a more direct role, because the Swiss state, the Federal Council, for example, managed conflicts between empires themselves or conflicts between empires and other independent countries. What we have to know in general is that 19th century imperialism needed an arbitration, and Switzerland in this context became the arbitrator or one of the main arbitrators. So the second main topic will examine, thanks to 14 archival cases for now, how arbitration made it possible to defend Swiss interests abroad and how arbitration was an element of Swiss integration strategy in Imperial Europe. Now, to get to the point, how does Brazil figure into the project? For a long time, some historians have studied the Swiss emigration to Brazil in connection with slavery or trade, like Beatrice Ziegler, Beatrice Vairassa, and Martin Nicoulin, who wrote the first book on the colony of Nova Friburgo. And in these studies, an element about state presence that needs more attention is, for example, the consular body. Switzerland established a consulate in Rio already at the beginning of the 19th century, and several ramifications developed in Brazil, 15 of which are shown on this map in the slide. Very concretely, this means that more than 10% of Swiss consular network in the world was located in Brazil before 1914. Now, on an individual level, consuls like Émile Raffard from Geneva, who was himself a slave owner, are partially documented, but many others are not. And the Brazilian case is a model to be examined to understand the activities of this consul in Brazil and their links with the Swiss government in Switzerland. For example, how consuls encouraged Swiss expansion, with which interaction, etc. To examine these links between consular bodies and Switzerland, we have to pass through archive of Federal Migration Office in Bern, because Swiss consul, in general, in the 19th century, sent reports, updated, confidential documents to this office. Now, the Federal Migration Office still exists today. It was founded in 1888, and now its name and function have changed. And now it deals with immigration issues and with asylum issues. But in the 19th century, Federal Migration Office was partially responsible for Swiss immigration overseas. And its purpose was, on one side, to channel Swiss migrants to places with economic potential, and on the other side, to provide expertise on private colonial projects. Once again, we know nothing about the history of this office and or about the role that Brazil played in it. But we are dealing with a public-private partnership that promoted Swiss expansion around the world and possibly also in Brazil. If I have mentioned consul, it is because they were Swiss state representative in Brazil. But consuls also promoted the creation of Swiss charity societies, whose objective was to consolidate Swiss presence abroad with practical mutual aid and direct relation with Bern. And these charity societies were subsidies with money from the federal government in Bern and various cantonal governments in the rest of Switzerland. Every year, from the mid-19th century onwards, the Confederation and the cantons sent a financial contribution. For example, in 1895, the amount was almost 48,000 Swiss francs, which correspond to about 2.5 million Swiss francs today. In Brazil, also in 1895, 3 Swiss charity societies received public subsidies, like every year, in Bahia, in Rio de Janeiro, and São Paulo. And in general, other Swiss charity societies, like the one in the Cairo, Egypt, in 1869, were often created on the initiative and with the money of Swiss government. And finally, all these societies, despite being private, were under federal control. The society in Bahia, for example, was formally recognized by Bern, which imposed a veto on its regulation in exchange, perhaps, for subsidies. From another point of view, what we can already see is that public subsidies, together with private contribution, were invested by these Swiss societies in local banks and financial circles overseas, controlled by regional and/or imperial elite. In the case of Bahia, we have, for example, Banco de Bahia, founded in 1858, but above all, Sociedade de Comercio and the London and Brazilian Bank. These last two entities, as shown by historian Joe Malern and Valnei Mascarenas do Lima Filho, these two last entities were involved in the slave economy. And the Swiss Charity Society of Bahia invested its money, including public money, in them. More briefly, to move on the second main topic of my project, that is imperial arbitration, I would like to remark that arbitration is a subject unexplored in the general field of legal imperialism. Yet, many conflicts in the 19th century were solved through arbitration. Even the Berlin Conference on Africa encouraged arbitration in Article 12 of its final act. Speaking of Brazil, a well-known arbitration case involved French Guiana, in which the Swiss Federal Council determined at the beginning of the 20th century the annexation of the state of Amapá in Brazil. So this Swiss arbitration put an end to French expansion in the Americas and reshaped geopolitical boundaries across the Atlantic. Here you can see on this slide the cover page of the very big volume of the Swiss judgment and an official map of the contested areas between France and Brazil. Now, in this case, but also in others, my question is, how arbitrators like Switzerland exploited arbitration to obtain concession? In other words, was arbitration also a weapon in the hands of the arbitrator? This is the question. If we look at the case of French Guiana, we find two opposite reactions. First, without surprise, there was great enthusiasm from Brazil because Swiss government gave right to Brazil. And we know that this arbitration was negotiated through Brazilian diplomats in Bern, like Baron of Rio Branco, with the support of Swiss migrants in Brazil, like Emilio Goldi, about whom Nelson Sanjad has written. And the second reaction was more critical, coming from France. In fact, through the press and through certain diplomatic channels, Switzerland was accused of favoring its economic interest in Brazil and more generally in Latin America, thanks to its role of arbitrator. And we can question, once again, how arbitrators used arbitration to their advantage. American newspaper, The Advocate, spoke, for example, of Swiss astuteness and not Swiss neutrality when it referred to Swiss arbitration in Mozambique in the last decade of the 19th century. This arbitration in Mozambique set the USA and Britain against Portugal. In this case, according to the archives, the Swiss government put pressure on Lisbon to guarantee the presence of Swiss missionaries in Mozambique, because at this time, the Swiss mission was in danger of being expelled from Mozambique. I'm sorry. I have lost my conclusion. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, after this overview of Brazil in the two main topics of my project, let me conclude by coming back to a more general level. With this Brazilian example, we can see how the state was also was an actor, if you want, of Swiss expansion in the 19th century. Today, I'm talking about Brazil because this is the topic of the conference, but we could talk about Congo, for example, or other countries that I have identified for my project. In any case, when I say that the state was present, I mean that the state was a public actor that accompanied and supported private actors, in this case through councils, subsidies, offices, arbitration, and so on. This is the thesis that my project will verify. And it is important to talk about that, about the role of the state, because today, Swiss authority recognize a Swiss colonial past, but exclude state participation in this Swiss colonial past. And contrary to this quotation, my project aims to show that several state bodies were involved in this historical context. And last but not least, I think that this project and this research program about Switzerland and imperialism can stimulate future research abroad. On one side, on state activity of other countries without colonies, like the Scandinavian ones, like Hungary, like Liechtenstein, etc. And on the other side, this project broadens analytical perspective on state activity of classical empire, because this empire, like Britain, like France, Germany, Belgium, Italy, beyond governing their own colonies, had to protect their citizen and interest in lands and colonies ruled by others. And this aspect is overlooked in the international historiography. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. So we're gonna process like earlier. We are aiming at taking 2 rounds of questions. So the floor is yours.
May I start or can I start? Okay, thank you for your very interesting presentations. I'm wondering, how the Swiss slave owners, such as Porchat and the Swiss government, perceive the debates that take place in the Brazilian parliament on the slave abolition?
Maybe we are going to collect a few. Here one. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for the presentation. So I want to make a quick comment on Fässler, with whom I am exchanging email for 20 years, and I have a pleasure to meet him in person here, and to all your effort to bring up all these questionings, aspects of Swiss state, because you are working with politics. So I think an imperialism. And now your project, Fabio, that I have the pleasure to participate, is very important. Open up a box of the entanglement of the Swiss state in Brazil and elsewhere. So I'm very glad to be part of it. To Nicacio, I would like to incentivize you to work more about abolitionism in Santos. The biggest part of this people involved in abolitionism were pedreira owners, not only Porchat, like Benjamin Fontana, which was the owner of the lands of Quilombo do Jabaquara. I studied that. I have 2 articles about that. So I think most of the abolitionists were slave owners, not only Porchat. So we have to understand how all this abolitionism movement, which I called as authoritarian, paternalistic abolitionist movement, and how it connects at certain point with more popular movement. So I think you have to open up your perspective to involve Porchat in the elite of Santos and São Paulo. Thank you.
Hello, I have 2 questions for you, Fabio, and thanks for presenting us your project. One, it's both of curiosity. What these judges, if I can use this word, understand as arbitration in the end of the 19th century, and how this arbitration in the end of the 19th century is different from the arbitration that will be practiced through the 20th century. So on the concept of arbitration. And the second question is how, because I know that the Swiss defended the Brazilian to have Amapá in our territory, how and if the Swiss judges took into account the whole mess of popular demonstrations that were occurring in this region of Brazil that was just part of a huge flow, let's say, of demonstrations all around Brazil in this period. Thank you.
I have a question about the last presentation. There is a third pist. It is quite known in the kind of influence of the state in diplomatic actions, and this means the pist that Switzerland tended to ask other empires to help them, in special the French state. So do you follow this piece too? Because one always says that there is much influence in this kind, but nobody shows exactly how this is done. So I would be interested if you follow this piece too.
Thank you very much. So other ends raised earlier, I will come back to you in the second round. So maybe we are going to proceed in the same order as earlier. Just speak.
I have no idea how the debate on abolition in Brazil was perceived from Switzerland, from Swiss politics or the government. Maybe my colleagues know more, but sorry, I cannot answer your question.
I summarize the question about arbitration, and I said I will try to give an answer. Okay, the functioning of arbitration in the 19th century is very simple. You have two countries in a dispute about boundaries, for example, and they asked a neutral state to decide their dispute. And each country sent arguments and documents, and at the end, the Swiss Federal Council, in my case, wrote a judgment like a small international court of justice. But there was not a supreme authorities to verify that this judgment can be applied. It's the framework of international law. C'est mouvant, c'est pas très clair. And then I don't know, currently, I don't know the evolution of the Swiss arbitration in the 20th century. I know just that I'm a PhD student of Thomas David, wrote a doctoral thesis about that. And about the question of France that demands to Switzerland, and Switzerland that propose itself to arbitrate, to negotiate, to be useful to great powers. It's right, and I think there were other countries like Germany that didn't want a Swiss arbitration for itself. But all of this remain to be explored. Once again, is a research program that I presented to you that will start in September 2026. So I'm not really operational now. Thank you.
Well, I think I'll give you just one answer for both questions because they are strictly connected. It's about the abolitionists in the context. I believe I had to be super brief here, so it may pass the impression it was a strange case in that context, but no. As Professor said, it was a paternalistic abolitionist movement with a lot of former slave owners from night to day turning and becoming abolitionists in the last years of slavery. There was a moment in the 1880s, in the crisis of the slave regime, that this movement get supports that never happened before, and Porchat is one of them. But he, in this case, is from 1886. Is from really the last 2 years of slavery. It is not. I didn't find any evidence before 1886 of organization in these associations. I think something important of his position, his strategy towards abolition is at the same time he is still buying new enslaved people to his properties. Usually he is announcing in the press the freeing of some enslaved people as a charity act. This is something that happens in several other cases. It's not specific of the Porchat family, but we have a strategy of publicity of charity acts of freeing some slaves. This was traditional by that time, but this was used a lot in this final phase of slavery, including when they freed the elderly people with more than 60 years, because the law obligated them to do that. It is announced in several newspapers without mentioning the law. It's announced as a charity act. We are freeing, he says the number, or he says the name of these enslaved people as an act of charity. I think it's something very important to the strategy that built this memory, erasing these connections to the reproduction of slavery. So it's not false that he freed enslaved people, but for all his life, he based all his fortune in slavery. I think that's it.
If I may, I want to say something about your project and the role of the state. I think it's a very important project because it took a long time for Switzerland to recognize that we have a kind of a colonial past. But then the way out that was used by Cassis and that was used by Doris Leuthard, when in Benin she said Switzerland has never had anything to do with that. The trick is to say the state of Switzerland. So Switzerland has a sort of trick to say die Gnade der späten Geburt, the mercy of a late birth. Switzerland did not exist as a nation state before 1848, so you would say the state has nothing to do with it. And this kind of dichotomy, Switzerland as a state never had anything to do with it, but the colonial powers, they had their state policies, which again is wrong, because a lot of colonial activities in France, in Britain, in Holland were also private companies, chartered companies, that then later the state had to take over when they failed. But these were huge private companies with their own armies, with their own administrators. So I think it's important to hopefully once and for all smash this stupid trick to say the state of Switzerland never had anything to do with it. And it's wrong in another sense, because in three cases, the case of Solothurn, the case of Bern, and the case of Zurich, we have state actors, state agents, state agencies that were involved. Solothurn and Bern, they invested in the South Sea Company, so public money of those predecessor states, of those mini states before the creation of Switzerland, they were involved. And in the case of Zurich, via Bank Leu, Zurich again was also involved as a state, because Bank Leu was a sort of semi-statal bank. So I think it's important to differentiate and to resolve this clear difference between here we have colonial powers that have a colonial policy, and here everything is private. So I'm happy about your project, and considering that the website is almost empty, I've learned a lot already here just from hearing about the project.
So we can go for another batch of questions. You were first.
So thank you very much to all of you. So I'm not an historian, I'm a social anthropologist. So it was very insightful to go deeper and deeper into these Swiss colonial entanglements in Brazil. So thank you very much. Some things that we already knew a little bit, but we get more into it. And I want to follow up a little bit on you, Hans. I'm interested in questions of reparation, and not only in like in an economic sense, but also politically or morally. As you said, in this post-colonial amnesia, the narrative of neutrality is at the core. One of in history making, but also as a political doctrine. And all of what you showed is that there are so many entanglements economically, politically, institutionally, which show that there is actually no neutrality. And my question is somehow, how do we get a step further? You know, there was like, when I remember in the post-colonial Switzerland theory making this idea of complicity, Switzerland as a colonial complicit. So is there in history like making this concept of complicity, could it be helpful, you know, to somehow change the kind of perspective of, in legal terms, you have this idea of like the perpetrator and the victim, but there are also beneficiaries. There are also implicated people, as Michael Rothberg calls it, or they're complicits. So do you see like a possibility to bring these different new empirical, you know, facts or narratives or insights into a larger, conceptual, theoretical framework of complicity?
Thank you very much. Just two quick questions, one for Hans and one for André. I mean, Fabio, I know your project by heart, so we talked about it a lot. Hans, could you just be a little bit more explicit and historicize your main character? I mean, you introduced Wilhelm Joos, and you mentioned that he was kind of criticized for being too modest or too kind of, you know, halfway. Could you situate him a bit more? Because, I mean, he was kind of living in this situation. I mean, there was this concern about the exploitation of factory workers here in Switzerland. Then there was this problem of exploitation of these Swiss Hauptpächter in German. I mean, these exploited Swiss laborers on plantations in Brazil. And then thirdly, as the fate of the enslaved people. So could you kind of situate him there? Where was his main concerns? And just kind of tell us a little bit more about to what extent he is, I mean, for us today, because, I mean, you're kind of recovering him, and I think I applaud this effort, but so to what extent is he kind of like a role model for us today, I mean, for lack of a better word, and to what extent was he also, of course, a child of his time, as we often say. And to André, then, the Porchat family, that's fascinating research. We have seen different cases, and we'll hear about different cases today and tomorrow. I mean, we heard of von May and von Steiger, who kind of remained very much in touch with their families here in Switzerland. So I was wondering, your Porchat family, do you see any evidence? Do they kind of remain Swiss? Do they stay in touch with society here in Switzerland? Or do they at some point just completely integrate, as you said, and become a Brazilian, more or less?
With a look at time, I want to be very brief. You asked about the theoretical framework of Swiss complicity. I'm not very good at theories. I consider myself the sort of craftsman in the whole colonial debate. I'm looking for Swiss plantation owners. I'm looking for plantations in Swiss administration, etc. But I'm also very much into reparations. I think reparations are the next step. Already early in my work, which is now a work of 25 years, I said, we know enough that Switzerland profited from slavery and the slave trade, and the consequence is material reparations. And when I was in Antigua, in a conference that the CARICOM organized, the community of Caribbean nations, there was also the questions of reparations, and in a press conference I was asked by somebody, is there an organization in Switzerland? And I said, sorry to say, there is no organization, it's just me for the moment. But when I go back, I will try to create one. And when I said it, it was sort of to leave this person perhaps with a little hope or optimism, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it. And when I came back, I said to myself, I can't just give that answer and not do it. So I created what is now called SCORES. The word SCORES has a meaning. It's scores to be settled, and it stands for Swiss Committee on Reparations for Slavery. You go on the internet and you will find 100 eminent Swiss persons or people from Switzerland that say, yes, Switzerland profited and there is an obligation for reparations. And the debate is going on. Some people, well, until the Trump counter-revolution, I would have said there is a kind of tendency towards reparations in many countries, Holland, debates in parliament, private companies, insurance companies that say we must look into our own past. I hope it's not going to be a complete backlash in that direction, but yes, I'm all for reparations. Joos is a contradictory person. He's a child of his time, but time has many children. And I would say that he also propagated Swiss emigration to Brazil. That was a bit problematic. It seemed at one time that he was more concerned for the parceiros than for the slaves. But all in all, I would argue if we need role models or heroes, he's a kind of hero for me, because he was really the one who launched this debate at a very late time, but he did so. And I think not only in the field of slavery, I mean, he was fantastic in all the subjects that he raised. Nothing was too big and nothing was too small for him. For example, he was very much concerned with the matchmaking industry in Switzerland that used child labor. It was very dangerous. It was poisonous for the people who produced the little matches. So he's very much concerned to make better conditions for these match workers. But in his parliamentary work, he was sometimes contradictory. Maybe he didn't know the mechanism of parliament yet, or he made mistakes or made wrong affiliations. But for me, when you look at all that has been said and done by Joos, I would say he can still serve as a role model, and he deserves the plaque on the house in Schaffhausen, and we will work towards it. Next year, I think it could happen. Yeah, I will, certainly.
Well, I think I can answer this question by comparing with the other case I have been studied, the case of Rodolfo Wursten, because in that case, he is clearly keeping the relations with Switzerland. He is part of the Swiss Association, the Philanthropic Association. He's part of the foreign community of the port. He is still connected until the point he disappears from there, from Santos, and I don't know if he returned to Switzerland or established in other port. But in the case of Porchat family, the associations they are part. For example, the Santa Casa de Misericórdia of Santos. They are local powerful associations for the elite. The Freemasonry of Santos. All these associations with a local basis, not with a Swiss identity like the Philanthropic Association. In terms of the marriages in the family, they marry their children and their sons and daughters with important families of the city and with other foreigners, like the consul of Spain in Santos. A part of this family will be formed by a daughter of Henri Porchat and a son of the Spanish consul, and a lot of families that were already rich and powerful in São Paulo. So I think this is in this specific case, they have no direct connections with Switzerland from the second generation, the third generation. Just maybe I have the only thing I have in these terms is some evidences they traveled to Europe, probably visiting Switzerland in the 1880s. The family traveled to Europe. So it's possible, but I think they are a typical case of integration in the local elite.
2 minutes? Okay, thank you. Just to conclude, I would like to come back to one of the first question about the concept of complicity. I agree with you, Hans. I'm not fan of conceptualization. I am a fan of archive, like a really historians. But about concept, when we speak about the Swiss state, a key word can be neutrality, but this is problematic. We can use this keyword, but this keyword, neutrality, must be treated critically, I think, because we speak about neutral Switzerland, but also Belgium was a neutral country, and the neutrality of the Belgian didn't prevent Belgium to have a big colonial empire in Congo. So neutrality can be expressed through arbitration, we know, and can be a tool to widespread this idea of neutral Switzerland. But I think that neutrality was a tool to integrate Switzerland into Imperial Europe. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think we can give a round of applause to our 3 presenters.